And it doesn't matter if you're filming on your iPhone, doesn't matter if you're filming on whatever. I mean, it doesn't have to be fancy equipment. But like, go tell a story. What's the beginning, middle, and end? Where's the conflict? Where's the in-depth? Where's the raw part of that story? If you can find that story, that's the other, I think, interesting and challenging thing about ministries like ours creating media in this day and age. Even though I think the quality is absolutely important, it also doesn't have to be high quality. Like, that's the weird paradox. Like, you can find a really low resolution, low quality, but very authentic, very raw story that somebody shoots, again, on their iPhone with not great whatever's, like sound, lights, whatever. And it's like, that was actually really powerful.
Yeah.
And it didn't require all the big equipment and gear.
Love God, love people, love people, love people. It's the AC Podcast. For the love of God, love people.
Hey, listeners, welcome to the AC Podcast. I am super, super honored to join you for the first episode of December. I'm here with a special guest, Brian Mosley, president of RightNow Media. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, man, I'm glad to be here, Troy. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And I think my boss, Andy Steiger, I would be remiss if I didn't say happy Thanksgiving to you, as he is a fellow American. So happy Thanksgiving to you.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the kindred spirits with Andy. We probably enjoyed some turkey worlds apart.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, listeners, at the time of this recording, Thanksgiving would have just happened in the United States. They would have had I'm assuming, an incredible feast that I'm jealous of, because I had ramen in Canada while you guys were having a feast. So
I won't tell you everything, but we did have some sweet potato stuff. We had mashed potatoes.
Man.
We had lots of good pies, lots of good stuff.
Good. I gotta ask. So when you do the sweet potato where you're living at, do you do the marshmallow on the top with? Yeah, that's the business.
I mean, it's essentially dessert during the meal.
That's
and then
right.
You get to have dessert after the meal, so it's kind of a bonus.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so then another question is: are we pecan pie or pumpkin pie? Where do you stand?
Okay. I didn't know where you were going with that question, Troy. I thought you were going to say, is it pecan pie or pecan pie? But you went pecan or pumpkin. I like both. My mom typically makes a pumpkin pie. My mother-in-law typically makes a pecan pie. And so no matter whose house I'm at, I win. So
there you go. That's awesome. That's awesome. Let's get into this conversation. One of the reasons I wanted to have this talk with you is actually Apologetics Canada has a conference coming up in March of 2025, and it's actually around the topic of a theology of technology. And as president of RightNow Media, that is a form of technology. It is a platform used for the sake of the gospel. And I think it is really hard to find a church nowadays that doesn't have some form of subscription to RightNow Media. And so this conversation, I just wanted to talk about the heart of RightNow Media, but I guess it'd probably be best to start with your story. Brian, how did you come to the Lord?
Yeah, so I was real thankful, especially now that I look back, just to grow up in a Christian home. So my parents, raised my brother and I in a home that loved Jesus, and we were at church and just growing, in the community there and growing through the Scripture there. And so, so for me, thankfully, it happened at a pretty young age. I remember very clearly being 11 years old. We were on a family vacation road trip across the country. I don't remember what sparked my questions, but I remember very clearly kind of late into the evening, it was dark outside, just started to pepper my parents with questions about Jesus, about faith. And they just patiently, answered those questions. And so by the time we got to the little hotel we were staying at on the roadside that night, I just remember going, okay, Dad, so what does all this mean? Like, I'm ready to follow Jesus. And so he just said, hey, it's really just committing your heart and saying, yeah, I know who Jesus is. I know what he did for me, and I'm ready to follow you. So I just remember praying there on that little motel bed, with my dad that night before going to sleep. So real thankful. Again, when I look back on my story, stayed on a pretty good straight and narrow path of just following Christ, plugged into my church and really growing there. Not that by any stretch, perfect or never making mistakes, but just feeling like, hey, this is what I'm really leaning into is my faith, and thankful for that church community along the way.
That's awesome. Did you happen to do Christian University, Bible college, or anything of that nature?
Yeah, so when I was looking for colleges, I wasn't like dead set on I needed to go to a Christian, university or Bible college, but so I looked at several options. I had started to become passionate about media, and so I visited Baylor University here in Texas, which does have this faith background to it, and ended up loving what I understood about the environment there and the culture there, as well as the media program there. And so that's where I ended up going to school. And it
Cool.
offered, for me, the best of both worlds. I mean, it was a really good place to grow in my faith, but it also offered an excellent just media degree.
Okay. And so with media being such a relatively broad topic, was there what aspect of it was it for you that was like, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, well, and so here's where kind of my personal story and the ministry story is like so intertwined, it's hard to sometimes even separate. And so I'll answer any question you want. I won't go too much into detail to bore you. So the ministry is like 46 years old. So, I mean, I'm 46 years old. It started by my dad and my granddad. My grandfather was a pastor up in Ohio.
Wow.
He and my dad began traveling and filming documentary stories of missionaries. And so in the late 1970s, that's how our ministry got its start, was trying to use the power of media, use the power of the screen to tell the story of what God was doing through these missionaries around the world.
So you were literally born into Right Now. Like,
I mean, like, yes, the same season it was like that started and I was born. And so grew up around it. So when I was headed towards college and honestly, it wasn't until kind of the end of my high school career that I even thought about media. But I just started to become really passionate about, okay, that's what Dad has been doing all these years. I'm more interested in that. It was kind of fascinating to hear about his stories of travel and his stories of interacting with his missionaries and seeing some of those documentaries. So all that was great. And I didn't know when I went into college exactly what I wanted to do, other than just, I want to tell stories, and I can see the power of the screen and the power of media in that.
That's really, really cool. Yeah, I was seeing here that part of what you were mentioning is that the journey started filmmaking in Tanzania, right?
Yeah. So for me, so that was when I was in college. And so here I had grown up around these stories of my dad and my granddad traveling the world filming these documentaries. I had never been overseas myself. And so then I found myself at 20 years old, in college studying media and communications and had this opportunity to go one summer and be in Africa for about 4 weeks. And so, there in Tanzania, I was like, God just helped a lot of things in my head and my heart click. And it was like, I love what I'm getting to do here. I love seeing these missionaries. I love getting to use this media degree that I'm studying. And I just thought, God, how do I do more of this when I get home and when I graduate? Because this is where I feel like I'm being used.
Yeah, that's really cool. So for you, is it in the media world? I mean, I think about when we're making a documentary, we're really trying to tell a good story. Like, what makes a good story for you as you're getting thinking about R&M? You guys are getting tons and tons of uploads, and people constantly want to send their content. But for you, what does a good story look like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, for all of us, whether it's the media that, we're getting to create in the Christian space or just the movies and the TVs and everything, the TV shows and stuff that we all get to enjoy. I mean, certainly conflict, is a big part of a good story, and not always just feeling like the outcome was going to happen no matter what. And so you feel like there's this struggle or this. And so even in the stories of like telling what God's doing through these missionaries or just what God's doing in people's lives here, kind of domestically when they're wherever they're living, if you don't have an element of like, okay, it wasn't always easy, I had to struggle through this, or this, was a big question I had. Like, I think that's what draws us all into those stories, because sometimes we tend to look at, we tend to look at other people's stories, and without really getting into the details of it, we kind of assume that everything was it just fell into place for them. Oh, like God just did this and this and this, and nothing was ever hard, nothing was ever a challenge, and they just were able to, and when you really uncover that, no, they had serious questions and they have serious doubts and they had serious struggles that they had to work through, and God brought them through. Like, I think that's where we get really drawn into those stories.
Yeah, I think it's something you touched on there. It's just people are looking to be able to relate and kind of see themselves in another person's story. And so when there is a story that, first allows a person to identify, but then they see a victory in it, and especially the victory that we're talking about, that's where the magic happens, so to speak.
Absolutely. Well, and so for years, and our ministry still does this, but we've created a lot of Bible study resources that students and youth groups can use. And, that's a hard audience, because they are coming in with a lot of challenges that they're already facing, a lot of skepticism around everything in life. They're questioning everything, and they should be. And we have found that if you can find, real life stories of other, teenagers and students who are just willing to share and say, hey, these are the challenges I've been facing, these are the questions I've had, these are the victories I have. Well, now, if you can tell that story, then when you put a teacher up next to that, a Bible teacher on the screen, or maybe even a live teacher there in the youth group themselves, the students are on the edge of their seats ready to hear what that person has to say, because that story drew them in. But too
Yeah.
often, if we just get up there and it's talking head and it's just preaching at you, the students are like, been there, done that. I don't need to have somebody else tell me what to do.
Right. That's good. With R&M kind of evolving since its inception in 2000, what does that look like?
Yeah.
What did it look like at the beginning
Yeah.
versus where it is kind of now?
Yeah, so I kind of tell the story in 3 chapters. So chapter 1 was that missionary documentary season. So for about 10 years, that was the only thing the ministry did, was travel the world, film these stories of missionaries, to try to tell primarily the church in the United States, like, hey, these are what these missionaries are doing. These are real life people. So that was a 10-year chapter from the late 1970s to late 1980s. Then in the late 1980s, there was a big transition, still using the power of media, but going from these the documentary format to, hey, what if we get content and media directly into churches instead of being broadcast on airwaves? It could go right into church. So it's VHS, at that time, and then eventually DVD, and so it's like these video-driven Bible studies that these small groups could use. So for about 20 years, that was the main part of the ministry, and that's what we did, was create those resources to put in the hands of those youth leaders or those adult Bible study leaders.
Yeah.
So that was a 20-year run, and then about 14 or 15 years ago, that's when really this kind of current chapter of RightNow Media really started. And that was, the thought was, okay, we love the church, we love, and can see the power of media, but technology is changing. And how do we get that message and use that powerful, medium of media to, how do you get it to the church? And it seemed like streaming was the way to go. We had no clue at that time that just transitioning from a DVD kind of physical media format to a streaming format, like how much that would, in a good way, change our ministry.
Okay.
But we just felt like, hey, this is what the next wave is, and we need to make sure we're thinking about that.
Yeah. I'd love to know how, like, when it comes to being forward thinking, oftentimes the church gets a really bad rap. Just Big C church gets a bad rap, and oftentimes people will say that the church is several years behind. How have you guys tried to obviously switching to digital, but what does it look like for you guys to try and stay ahead of the curve while remaining true to, I would imagine, your ethos?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say we know exactly how to do it all the time, because it is a challenge. Certainly, when we made that transition from DVD to streaming, there were a lot of churches that were like, yeah, we're not there yet. We're not ready. And so it was hard, interacting with those churches and having them say, hey, I just want that Bible study on DVD. And it's like, hey, we don't have enough money anymore to try to put it on DVD and to put it in streaming. Like, we're just trying to make do with what we got. And so you had to look at some of those churches in the moment and say, we want to serve you, but we can't until you're able and interested in the streaming format. So that was a challenge, and it was really hard to say no to people. I think we were always trying to, like, for us, I view us as a content ministry. I mean, 100% center of the bullseye is we're content.
Yeah.
We are always looking for what is the technology that is necessary and is appropriate at the time to get that content into people's hands. And so whether it was a documentary, whether it was VHS, whether it was DVD, now whether it's streaming, whatever it is in 5 or 10 or 20 years, I mean, I hope that we are thinking ahead enough to go, yeah, it doesn't really matter the format. I mean, there's a lot of ramifications to what format it is, but
For sure.
the goal isn't to get a streaming thing in front of people, is to get this media, this resource in front of people. What's the way to do that? So I think as long as we're asking ourselves, and as the church is asking themselves, like, hey, what is our main goal? And then all the things that are around that goal are secondary to the main goal. And as long as we keep that main goal the main goal, then you don't get too caught up in, well, it always has to be this way, or this is our goal isn't just DVD sales. Our goal is getting the content in front of people. What's the best way to do that?
No, that's good. Yeah, that adaptability is really, really important. I mean, I remember even for our organization going into the pandemic, that was right kind of when I came on board. And I remember those initial conversations where, okay, we're pivoting, we're adjusting because we can't get in front of people, but how do we still get things in people's hands? Because the work doesn't stop. And I think in the long run many of the ministries that were willing to try and be innovative, it actually made you a little bit more agile than you might have initially thought you could be. So that's really cool to hear. I have a question about, I guess, content, because one of the things that, and I as a believer, I was even a proponent of, is Christian content has had a bad rap of being corny.
Yeah.
How have you guys met that stereotype and that challenge sometimes?
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you're certainly not alone in that, opinion and perspective on just the general sentiment around Christian media. the way we look at it, and our team here will talk about it, is, the message that we're trying to communicate. I mean, the gospel message there's no more important message than that in the world.
Right.
So then you say, okay, if we're going to try to communicate that message, to what degree of quality can we wrap around that message so that it's never going to overshadow the message itself, but you want to put the same kind of quality into the creation of that content, the creation of that resource that the message itself warrants and justifies. And so now, we don't have Hollywood budgets to put into everything we're doing. So, everybody's limited on their budget. It doesn't matter if it's, the budget of our ministry, the budget of a small church, or the budget of a big church. Like, everybody who's creating resources and content, I just think you have to go, how do you maximize what we've been given to create the highest quality possible? Because the message, it does matter. Like, the message is
For sure.
So important. So when we create our Bible study resources, we're always trying to think very clearly of, our audience is a small group. We're not just trying to repackage, a sermon that was delivered to a live audience. There's nothing wrong with a sermon that was delivered to a live audience, but that's a different environment, a different, format than what we're trying to do here. And so you're trying to go, what does this particular audience in this particular moment need for that message to hopefully resonate well? And our team here, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of folks, and on your team as well, like, that could create and do awesome things in the entertainment space, but they've gone, no, I'm going to use the budgets and the resources I've been given to create this kind of resource, for the kingdom, and they love doing it, and they're going to put every ounce of their creativity in it. It's fun to see it come out, in that way.
That's really cool. How big is the RightNow Media team? I mean, do you guys have people that are like, what does it look like for you guys as far as operations? Are you all in one big facility? Are you abroad?
Good question. So we have an office here in McKinney, Texas, which is just a little bit north of Dallas, and we have about 180 people on our team. And those people, most of them are here in the building. There's a handful of folks that are scattered, remotely, and that team that I just described there, all of us are primarily serving kind of a U.S. and Canadian audience.
Got it.
And then we've got a global team that's newer, that's really serving folks outside of the U.S. and Canada. And so we've got about 65 or 70 people located in some different countries around the world, and they're creating resources, with teachers and pastors from their part of the world, with, in their language that's culturally relevant to their church. And so that's been really cool to see, content created in Korean and in Spanish and in Hindi, and I mean, just, Bible study content for that church, with leaders from that part of the world.
That's really cool. That's really cool. So given how technology lately has been kind of advancing, how have you guys, I guess, maybe utilized artificial intelligence in any capacity? Or are you guys kind of on the side of like, we're going to wait and see, or, where do you guys kind of stand in that area?
Well, I mean, it kind of goes to your question earlier, too, which is a good one. I mean, just how do you stay innovative and not just kind of hang back? And so we're definitely not trying to hang back here. We're trying to go, okay, what could that look like? So we are seeing, probably like other ministries and churches and groups are seeing, like we're seeing great help in terms of not like content creation from scratch, but like, kind of ideation, like, hey, okay, how do you take something that maybe already exists and create some variations of it? How do you get some ideas spurned off of it? We're also seeing some really neat progress in the form of translations and dubbing. And so you may have seen some of the videos out there that float around online. It's just amazing, where they're matching up people's lips and they're sounding.
We just started using that, yeah.
It's crazy. And we're learning that the technology is there. There's some work to be done on like in Korea, they were telling us, hey, the way that the AI is translating and doing that is not the right formality. Like, it's either sometimes too formal or too informal, and so it's like, okay, it's going to get there, but it's amazing to see what the technology is able to already do. And I think a year from now we'll be like, okay, it's doing it.
Yeah, it is a crazy thing. Our filmmaker was playing around with I believe it's called lip dub, and with lip dub he had me doing one of our promo things in Russian, I believe, and to hear yourself and look at yourself speak Russian, I don't know a lick of Russian. Absolutely not. I couldn't even fake it. But technology is advancing every single day, and it's pretty crazy to see that. So I wanted to ask you, you have tons of people that are subscribed to RightNow Media. We don't have to get into the numbers and that sort of thing, but how would you guys measure your success to a certain degree?
Yeah, that is a really hard question. I mean, like, there's easy metrics that we can say, like, how many churches are subscribing, how many people from those churches are subscribing, and we certainly pay attention to all that because we feel like it's an important part of.
For sure.
Hey, this is the reach we have. These are the people that are engaged. I'm always leery, when ministries try too much to like put numbers to their success, because at the end of the day, I think all of us in ministry, we're about transformation. It's hard to grow. It's hard to measure growth and transformation, but it doesn't, I don't want that to ever be a cop out either for people.
For sure.
Like, well, okay, so I can just go do whatever I want, and it doesn't really matter if there's results and outcome. I mean, that's the balancing act we're all in. So we certainly pay attention to some of those key metrics. For us, it really, like, discipleship is a key word for us, and particularly discipleship in the context of community. And that community could look like a small group, it could look like a family, it could look like a one-on-one mentoring relationship. So one of the things we're trying to look at is, okay, are the resources we're creating, the churches and people we're serving, like, are they using this and going through this content in the context of community? Because, like I said earlier, we are 100% a content ministry, so I love content. And yet, I know that content doesn't equal discipleship. I mean, you can watch all the content, 24 hours a day, all year long. Doesn't mean that just because you're watching content or listening to content or reading content that you're changing. So I believe when you look at Scripture, when you see the way that we're commanded and taught, like, that community is so vital. So we place a high emphasis on trying to serve and be in those community environments. I feel like if we can do that, I'll tell our team here, from time to time, look, our act of obedience is to create the highest quality resource we can, put it in the hands of as many people as we can, knowing that we're not God, we can't change and do anything that He's going to do there. But we hope that our act of obedience and being faithful there is what one of the things that He uses anyways to help transform people's lives. And so we can't take that burden on. We just have to be faithful in delivering that resource into the hands of as many people as we can.
No, that's really cool. Just maybe taking that a little bit step further, being that you guys are very much a content ministry, do you guys do anything that's kind of in person where people get, maybe you guys put on a conference or you have some form of formal events or something like that?
Yeah, we actually, about 3 weeks ago, held our, what we call our RightNow conference. And it's a big event here in Dallas, primarily for church leaders and pastors. So we'll have about 2,500 or so church leaders come in for that. And it's really fun for our team. We hope and believe it's really a great experience for the attendees as well. But it's really fun for our team because like you're saying, so much of what we do is, it's digital. Like, we don't ever get to see and interact with the people.
That's
so
right.
To be around those leaders for those days and just be together, that's really fun. And we do some other stuff, some webinar type things where you're getting to interact with people more one-on-one. But the live event that we just did about 3 weeks ago, we started doing that event in 2004. So, we're a little over 20 years, into doing that event in some manner. And it's just a big highlight of the year.
That's really cool. That's cool. In your time of being with R&M, what has been one of the biggest personal lessons you found as being part of this ministry?
So I've been here 25 years, so I got probably a lot of lessons, learned the hard way throughout those 25 years. I would not trade, jobs with anybody in the world. I love, what I get to do. I love being a part of this team and the mission that we're on. I've had the privilege of getting to work alongside or work with, a lot of great teachers and pastors over the years. Just being there with them as they're teaching and trying to record and create those resources. I think I'm just always, what's the right word to say, encouraged and inspired, when I'm just kind of up close to some of those teachers who, they have some notoriety because they've written books or they're just at the conference or whatever, and you're like around them, they're just real people, and you kind of see them flustered sometimes, but you also see them, clinging on to their faith and just praying and being, and you're just like, okay, we all have, kind of jobs to do, if I can say it that way, and yet we're all in this just for ministry. We want to see God work through us and see lives change. And so it's encouraging to see people who are just striving to be faithful no matter what kind of platform, God's given them. And so, that from just maybe a unique perspective of getting to work with so many different, churches and leaders and pastors has been a real blessing.
Well, in that, I'd love to hear, because like you said, you're working with so many different ministries, so many different churches, which means that it's probably a multiplicity of denominations as well, and with doctrinal and theological approaches. How do you guys navigate that? You got 180 people.
Yeah.
Like that's got to be tough sometimes to try and, I guess, appease as many as you can.
Yeah. I guess all I would say is we just do it the right way, Troy. I don't know what else. No, I'm just kidding. We just split that right down the middle. No, that's a really hard one, honestly. We are trying to hold true to those kind of, ultimate priority, ultimate things, doctrinal issues. We just got done as a leadership team reading David Platt's book. Gosh, I'm forgetting the title right now, but it's his newest book, and he breaks things down into 3 buckets. Like there's bucket 1, like these are the things we should all be, rallying around.
Yeah.
There's kind of bucket 2 and 3 issues, which are not unimportant, but let's not be as divisive of those. And so that was good language as we were reading through that book. Just to go, we want to be about this kind of first bucket, bucket
primary, close-handed issues.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Now, it's hard though. Like you said, there's a lot of people on our team. There's a lot of churches you're trying to serve.
Sure.
There's polarizing topics you can start to touch on as you're teaching, and that gets certain people really riled up one way and other people riled up another way. And I wish I could say there's like this easy formula, if you do this and this and this, then it's always going to work. But it certainly doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I hear you. We it's one of the things that makes our organization very relational, but also at the same time can be one of the greatest challenges is we let people send an email. People will send an email, and some days you're absolutely loved for what you've put out, and then other days you're not. And I think it can be very, very sobering to recognize, like, wow, Lord, you really have given us a beautiful gift in your word and of your gospel. And it's very humbling to know that in the midst of that, you're still dealing with different hearts and minds of people from all over the place.
Yeah.
And to navigate that with such a gentleness and a grace is, like you're saying, you got to focus on the main thing. Keep the main thing the main thing.
It is. And again, it's really hard. I mean, we have a team here internally that's trying to meet all the time about the content, both the content that our team is creating, but also the content we're trying to partner with other ministries on, and just, ask those questions. Okay, is this sticking to the right things and the main things? Is this going to be a distraction from what we're ultimately trying to do? And then you got to make the hard calls sometimes. I mean, there's been, particularly in the United States, there's been some race-related issues that's like, okay, how do we address those in a way that's biblical and gospel-oriented, doesn't shy away from things? And it's touchy topics like that generally, as we address them, you feel like you're holding true to the gospel and you're trying to teach a very biblically centered message. But some people, that gets them real riled up. And so you just have to make the decision sometimes like, well, there's certain issues we're going to address, even though we know you're going to get the bad emails, and we're just going to go for it and pray that God honors what we're trying to do.
Yeah. That's just it. Is at the end of the day, knowing the goal is to honor you, and it is not to please man. So we can't walk in fear and trembling before people just because it's hard to talk about.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's one of the most beautiful things about media, like because it makes difficult conversations palpable for people. It's far more digestible when you watch a video that takes time to unpack rather than like you're saying, let me just stand up on this soapbox. And go off for a half an hour.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then I think, again, for those of us who are creating media, again, whether it's for our kingdom purposes or even obviously in the entertainment world, I mean, media can be so easily used to manipulate. I mean, it's, the tools are right there. You can
That's right.
dial in the music, dial in the slow motion. I mean, you can manipulate so easily too. And it's like, okay, how do you both use this craft fully without also then diving into a manipulative state? And I mean, it's a challenging place to be. But again, I think you got to keep coming back to, okay, we're trying to get this message across. It's an important message. How do we do it in the most high quality way possible?
I would love to know what's next for you guys. Do you have any like big audacious ideas? Like, hey, what if we were to try this? Like, do you have anything like that on the horizon?
Yeah, I would say the two biggest things for us that are in the new category, one is not brand new, but it's that global work. I mean, so it's the last 5 or 6 years as we've really tried to work alongside churches from around the world, and we're learning so much. It's a lot of fun, but it's like, okay, we are just learning every single day, both how to best, come with the posture of serving and trying to be, listening, but also just logistically, like, how do you do this around the world and make it all make sense? So we are loving getting to serve the global church, and it's been an awesome, journey the last several years. So that's still very new, but not brand new. But the other big brand new thing for us, going back to that word discipleship, we just have really been asking ourselves, particularly, I think like a lot of ministries since COVID, okay, what are we about, as a ministry? I think churches are asking themselves the same thing. What are we about? Where did, during COVID, where there was just a lot of turmoil, where did we go wrong? Like, where were we not maybe teaching and discipling people in a way that was, deeper than that was as deep as we wanted it to be? So anyway, we're asking ourselves that same question. So for the last couple of years, we said, okay, if our ministry is here to help churches with their discipleship efforts, we want to continue to create the small group content like we've been doing. We want to continue to provide that from these other ministry partners. But is there something we should be doing that's more aimed at pastors and leaders? And so in January, we're launching something called RightNow Pastors Plus. And it's a library of courses designed for a church leadership team to really discuss and dive into some of these important issues related to ministry in this day and age. So it really is about, like, there's one set of courses called Discipleship Framework. And it's like, how do you and your church and your local context create a discipleship strategy and plan that really is going to effectively, minister to the people that God's put in your flock. And so we're trying to put the power in the hands of that local pastor and their leaders to go, how do we discuss what's important and what's going to make sense in our local context?
Yeah.
So we're really excited, and there's a whole series of other courses, around some really strategic topics for the church, for those teams, leadership teams. So it's, in some ways for us, it's brand new because we've not really addressed that particular audience before. It's still in our wheelhouse of trying to create resources for the church. It's just looking towards that leadership audience rather than just a small group audience. And so we're real excited about it.
That's really cool.
That is for us kind of the first step in really trying to evaluate for us as a ministry, how do we step into this world of helping churches with their disciple-making efforts in a bigger and bigger way. And I don't know all the answers to what may come after that, but this Pastors Plus offering is the first big thing.
That is really, really cool. I have found for myself, I'm a recording artist, and I know the listeners are like, Troy, we know. I'm like, yes, but Brian doesn't know, you guys, okay? So for many, many years of going to different youth conferences and young adults conferences and doing music, one of my greatest burdens was always, we bring people in for a weekend and they're charged up and they're excited, and I believe people have some really incredible encounters with God, or maybe the community that they're in, but where does the discipleship go from here? Who is equipping the leaders to equip these young people? And so it's exciting for me to hear that as a ministry, even of your guys' stature, that's something that you're still acknowledging and you're actively trying to play a role in. Because, I mean, we live in a very divided world, and nothing's new under the sun. However, we're taking an intentional role in trying to disciple the next generation of leaders and the now generation of leaders. It's really encouraging.
Well, and I appreciate you saying that. I mean, it's kind of one of those deals you look at and you go, I think we should all be about that. So then you start to go, okay, if we're not about that, what are we about? And then you start to think, okay, I think where the challenge is, we've really talked here a lot internally, I think one of the challenges is that word discipleship, or the idea of disciple making. I mean, it's absolutely critical to our faith, and yet it's sometimes hard. It's crazy. It's like hard to define, or like back to your question, it's like it's hard to measure. Like, okay, if you went up and asked any pastor, like, hey, are you a disciple-making church? They're all going to say yes. And then you say, well, how are you doing that? They're going to say, well, it's my sermons. No doubt, that's a part of it.
Yep.
Oh, we have small groups. No doubt, that's a part of it. But are they working? Like you're saying with your events and the record, there's no doubt. Every Sunday morning, God is working through those sermons and those church gatherings to help people grow closer to Jesus. But then what happens when they go home? And,
that's right.
And they got bills to pay. And what happens when they go home and their kids are off, the rails? What happens when they go to work and they've got turmoil? Okay, where is that daily day in and day out? I'm growing in my faith happening. And anyway, all I have to say, it's just, we're all on that mission, but it's really hard to measure and it's really hard to define sometimes. And I think that's where we all can go, we're about it, but we start to fragment and go, but our way of going about it looks so different.
Yeah, that's cool. So for the young Brian who is wants to get into Christian media, but it's 2024, what is something that would have helped you be a little bit more prepared for jumping into that world? And maybe what is something that you would say to that new generation? Because nowadays everyone's got a camera, everyone's making content, everyone wants to be some form of personality. For a second, I thought you were calling me young right now, which I was real thankful for. But you're saying me young back then. I got it. So I have 4 kids. 2 of them are in college. So I'm kind of you're asking me to basically say what I've been trying to tell them, which is, they're in this category. They're trying to figure out life. They're both, interested in media. They've grown up around it as well. And it's okay. Like you said, everybody's got a camera in their hands. So, that's so different than 25 years ago for me, or 30 years ago, really, when I didn't have that, right? So it was you had to be really intentional to go find the equipment.
So now it's not a matter of access to equipment. It really goes back to, I think, one of the first questions you asked me, and that's like, well, what makes a good story? Like, what are you trying to do? Because anybody can just go shoot a couple great shots of the sunset. Anybody can go, walk around and film themselves just telling about their day or telling some little nugget of wisdom. But like, are you telling a story? And so, so my encouragement to my kids has been, and to other younger leaders, is I would just say, man, go, if you're interested in media and you wanted to, kind of capitalize on the power of media, like go find good stories to tell. And it doesn't matter if you're filming on your iPhone, doesn't matter if you're filming on whatever. I mean, it doesn't have to be fancy equipment. Like, go tell a story. What's the beginning, middle, and end? Where's the conflict? Where's the in-depth? Where's the raw part of that story? And if you can find that story, that's the other, I think, interesting and challenging thing about ministries like ours creating media in this day and age. Even though I think the quality is absolutely important, it also doesn't have to be high quality. Like, that's the weird paradox. Like, you can find a really low resolution, low quality, but very authentic, very raw story that somebody shoots, again, on their iPhone with not great whatever, like sound, lights, whatever. And it's like, that was actually really powerful.
Yeah.
And it didn't require all the big equipment and gear. And so, I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit there, Troy. I would just say the story. It's trying to capitalize on the power of the story. Just get really good at finding and telling those stories, because that, no matter what, whether you're doing it for a church or for a ministry or just some other company out there, like, if you can tell good stories, that's what makes or breaks a good medium.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time. It is an honor to get to partner with R&M and have the work that we've got to do up on your platform. It has really, really been cool to see people kind of stumble across it, and I get a little message like, "Hey, is this you on RightNow Media?" And I'm like, yes, that is me.
Yeah.
So appreciate that a lot, Brian.
Absolutely. Well, we love the transition for us from DVD to streaming. One of the things we had no idea back then, 14, 15 years ago, was that we would get to partner with folks like you guys and find other great, people creating amazing resources and get to be a part of their, ministry in a small way. And so it's awesome, to hear you say that, to get to do these kind of things and go, okay, this is cool, the way God's being able to bring, people together in different skills, different resources, and we're just there to serve the church together. And it's awesome to get to do it with you guys.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we will definitely be praying for you guys as you roll out this new Pastors Plus. I probably butchered the name of that, but I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
As you roll that out, and just again for yourself and your family, thank you for the work that you guys are doing. Thank you for, again, presenting the gospel in a professional way, in a creative way. As a creative, I love being able to see the church move forward with creativity in these kind of avenues. So again, thank you so much for your time. Send a shout out to your team, especially Tiffany. She's been great for us. So
she's awesome.
So listeners, thank you so much for tuning into the AC podcast. Again, if you are not subscribed to RightNow Media, go and do it. It is an incredible platform. Lots and lots and lots of great content on there. But you guys know the drill. Until next time, love God, love people. Brian, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Troy. It was awesome.